All right, well, welcome to the program. No fancy music because I'm blaming the producer today. He didn't charge the iPad enough with everything going on, so I will definitely be docking the producer his pay. But welcome to this live stream. My name is Dean Millard, Larry Fisher, UFHL Insider, joining me on the show today as we recap a very successful draft for a lot of franchises. Maybe some didn't get as many picks as they wanted. Maybe that was by design, but certainly I think success for everyone, and success just to get it off the ground. Larry, yourself, Andrea, and Nathan did such great work for us to even have that draft. It just shows that not even technical issues can slow down the UFHL. So what do you think overall about the draft weekend and some of the things that took place?
Like you said, Dean, it didn't exactly go off without a hitch. We had some technical difficulties getting it going, and all the credit there goes to Andrea and Nathan for the quick pivot and getting us up and running, and very patient and committed group of owners, franchises to stick it out with us. And it was a long first round. It spanned a number of hours, so great for them all to be very committed and passionate about the league. And there was bidding on every pick, so it wasn't like people pulled the plug and gave up on the draft and took whoever they got. They all stuck it out and really showed a lot of dedication to the league and patience, as well as passion towards drafting prospects. And to be honest, Dean, you know me, I'm a draft junkie and a scout at heart. So this is the event I look forward to the most every year, is the NHL draft, and now the UFHL entry draft auction. This is my big weekend that I circle on the calendar, and it certainly it was exciting going into it. And to be honest, Dean, I didn't love the NHL draft. There was a lot of surprise picks, guys. Again, it was an unpredictable year, right? But based on consensus consolidated rankings, the NHL draft, the top 64 was kind of all over the map. There was several surprises, which are fun, but players that in my personal scouting rankings and my viewings, I felt they were reaches at the spots they were taken. So it was interesting to see how the UFHL entry draft auction, the selection order would differ from the NHL, because this year, unlike last year where we followed the NHL selection draft order and Alexis Lafreniere went up first and Quentin Byfield went up second and Tim Stützle third, and the franchises all took turns bidding on the exact order that they were drafted in the NHL. This year we switched it up, and then we just put up the draft spot. So 5 franchises bid on first overall, and if you got first overall, you could select Owen Power if you wanted, or you could select Matty Beniers, or you could select, Jesper Walstad, who really went 20th overall in the NHL. Maybe you want him as your franchise goaltender in the UFHL. So the element of surprise was there, and to see how the selection order would compare to the NHL. And to be honest, I look at the two side by side. I think 5 years from now, the UFHL selection order is going to look like produce some stronger results and some more NHL players than the actual NHL selection order. I might be a little biased because more so mirrored my rankings or better matched up with my personal rankings, but I like the job that the 32 UFHL franchises did in the entry draft auction.
Well, that would be 2 for 2 this week, because I think the expansion draft went off a lot better than Seattle's. I'm gonna be brag here. At least the production was pretty awesome, and I think Brendan's picks and trades were certainly way more exciting than what we saw on the NHL. And when I was on the Pipeline Show with Guy Flaming, which is where you and I connected, we always had our 4 majors. And, like in golf, we had our 4 majors: the draft, the Frozen Four, the Memorial Cup, and, of course, the World Juniors. And so I, like you, get really excited about the draft. And I love that you put together these kind of facts and figures for the 2021 eligibles. So run through what sticks out for you here.
Yeah, you're looking at return on investment for the 64 prospects that were drafted by UFHL franchises that were previous. All the prospects, there was actually 585 total prospects that were eligible for the 2021 NHL draft, were registered as draft prospect status players on the UFFS platform. Obviously, 223 prospects got drafted in the NHL, so that tells you that our scouts had registered more than double the number of prospects that actually were drafted. But only 64, only 2 rounds worth went in the entry draft auction. But as you can see here, Dean, combined scout spending going back to last August with the inaugural futures auction in 2020, which there was 95 2021 eligible prospects were auctioned as futures last August. You can see what that brought, as well as the 490 draft eligible 2021 prospects that were registered on the open market for the flat rate of $20 USD worth of score coin. The combined total of total scout spending on this draft class for prospects that were eligible for 2021 was $17,340, and the franchises didn't disappoint. That was the scouts spent that on 585 total prospects. The franchises stepped up and picked the 64 prospects that they felt were most coveted from this draft class, and spent a combined $30,445.63 USD. So not quite double, but almost double the total spending on 64 versus 585. So overall, I think the scouts have to be happy. And the key note there, Dean, is it says right at the end, to date, the franchise spending on this draft class will continue as those players that didn't crack the top 64. Some of those players are obviously going to overtake and develop at a higher rate than the 64 that were drafted. There might be some busts among that 64, and there's going to be others that weren't selected in the entry draft auction that are going to rise over the, next year. We're going to get hopefully a full season of junior hockey and and World Juniors and everything else. Some of these prospects are going to overtake the guys that were picked ahead of them, just like in the real world. And the scouts that own those prospects that trend up in the real world are going to continue to benefit and get return on investment on the platform as the franchises come knocking for those now technically free agent prospects.
Yeah, it was. I think you have to look and say it was a very successful weekend for a lot of things. The scouts for their return on investment, the franchises who were able to get the prospects they want, some more aggressive than others, and the platform to see, when you institute a proper formula, and you don't. I think the draft was night and day different, and the money generated was night and day different than in the past. So even the platform has to be really excited to see where values have gone, and we'll get into some of the numbers and things that a little bit later. Before we get into recapping some of the teams, though, interesting kind of debate going on about the second round in the UFHL. And I know there are some that are going to propose to get rid of it. I will be dead set against that. I'm already forming my gang to fight against that proposal. It's going to be like Anchorman, those fights that they have in Anchorman with Will Ferrell, like PBS shows up, and we're getting ready for it. But in all seriousness, I don't want less tradable assets in this league. I, in fact, would want more. I don't know if we need to go to 7 rounds, but from an owner's perspective, I would like to see 3 rounds possibly. I know there was some... I used the wrong word in the chat today, saying complaining, and I apologize for that. But there's some disappointment about some of the picks. Very few of those picks. But I still think a 3rd round would be great. But I definitely don't want to go away from a 2nd round. You don't have any skin in this game as an owner, and I'm also trying to think big picture too. I think an extra round would be good, and I think taking away a 2nd round decreases a lot of trade activity and assets for some smaller market teams. But as the scouting director, what are your thoughts?
That's just it, Dean. As the scouting director, I do represent the scout interests as well and have to look out for their best interests. And I can see the pros and cons here. And I think the off-season owners meetings, I've actually seen members of the scouting committee who are high-level scouts are in favor of or not high-level scouting, not your scouts, but scouts that are some of the ones that benefited most from this auction are actually in favor of getting rid of the 2nd round as well. But I think the franchises that invested in their scouting department, Duckman's Domination, making an affiliation with, having Craig Button as your advisor over scouting, you can make a lot of value in that 2nd round. You might not pay as much for it, but if you're picking the right prospects with the right scouts employed versus an open market, a free market where all 32 franchises can go and it's a bidding war amongst everybody to try and pry that prospect away from whatever scout has them if the draft ends in the 1st round. I like the suspense of the 2nd round. I found it very interesting to see, although I will admit that there wasn't a whole lot of bidding in the 2nd round. I could barely keep up entering the picks before the next bid started because there weren't too many extensions. There wasn't a high demand as far as bidding goes in the 2nd round. It was more like a regular draft where sort of whoever was up, whoever bid up the first one, it was kind of everybody let him go, and that's who got him. And that goes both ways. Does that mean that the prospects in the 2nd round are sort of, dime a dozen and it doesn't matter who you get, just take what you can get for the minimum bid kind of thing? Or does that mean that, maybe the franchises just didn't know what to expect? Because it was a strange year in the NHL too, Dean, with just not enough viewings of a lot of these prospects. So I think lots of pros and cons here. I'm in favor of keeping the second round personally, but as mentioned, there's scouts that have a lot of skin in the game who are in favor of getting rid of the second round as well. So I think those are going to be heated debates. I can see the Anchorman scenarios playing out, or scenes playing out at the owners' meetings, because the scouts, you're right, they do feel passionate about the fact that the last 4 prospects picked in the entry draft auction, 61, 62, 63, 64, went for $40 or less. But the rest of the second round went for 75 or more. And the average pick in the second round was still over $100, which is as one thing that was mentioned on the chat too, Dean, was that the waivers, right? Look how many players are NHL caliber already and are clearing waivers at $25 that franchises won't pick up because they're not valuable enough to make their 23-man roster. So what makes a prospect who's 3 to 5 years away as a second rounder to making an impact in the UFHL, what makes them worth more than $25 or more than $75 versus an NHL player who's looking for a new landing spot on waivers and can't find one? So I see the pros and cons from both sides, and it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves with the second round debate and the minimum bid debate.
Well, 2 things about that. First of all, Rob Love did some really terrific work with Fanalytica. I'm not going to speak for you. I'm not smart enough to be able to figure it all out, to try to explain it on this show, and I really do not want to misrepresent what Rob is doing. Very first time I was live on television, if a certain CFL commissioner would have watched it, I probably would have went to jail for slander. So I learned my lesson very on in my broadcasting career. Don't get on and talk about something you don't know everything about. So I don't want to misrepresent some great work that Rob did. We're going to get Rob on an upcoming program to be able to explain it, and he's going to be able to share it. But there's a lot of work done there. So apologies to Rob. I just didn't feel comfortable enough, and I'm sure you're the same way, Larry, without diving into it. Don't want to misrepresent it. But the other thing I want to mention about the second round is I was sitting there grinding, wishing I was in some of those auctions because, I had players, we'll get into my selections later when we do the Duckman's Domination team, but it takes the different kind of bidders. You might have a lull in the second round where there's no way, and then some other big spenders come in and then they create a bidding war. And we did see that with some things. So, who knows if somebody really likes somebody, but they only had one pick because they were a really good team and they don't get in until 62 and then they drive that up because there's somebody else. I think with the auction format, there's a lot of things that you go into the draft that are just going to be unpredictable. And we saw, the prices from one player after another guy were higher than the one before him. And, prices in the second round still continued to be high early on. So the other thing is there's nothing like this out there. So I think it was pretty unique. And I think it was fascinating to watch how teams value different players depending on what they were paying.
And Dean, that second round, imagine if the NHL had this system. Imagine if you were anywhere from 31 to 35, you could bid on 31 on that first pick of the second day, which in the UFHL was a two-ratty who, obviously had the 4-goal game after he was selected in the second round in the NHL draft. He did slide through the first round in the UFHL, but again, by the next day, word had spread that, he took that second round snub to heart and went out and scored 4 goals. And there was a big bidding war to get a two-ratty, and he actually outperformed his scout sale price, which was sort of a concern that might be a losing investment on a two-ratty because he was, projected first overall pick the last year at the futures auction. So I think, the start of the second round, if you imagine the NHL having those bidding wars, I think you'd see a lot more bidding in the second round in the NHL just because they trust their scout that much. And they think that, all these other franchises, what if they have the same guy at the top of their list and that's our guy and we want him? We're going to go out and we're going to win this bidding war and we're going to take that player. I expected to see a lot more of that. We did see one kind of interesting bidding war later in the second round on Dmitry Kuzmin, who is a Winnipeg Jets third-round pick, a Belarusian defenseman who scores the lacrosse goals as an undersized defenseman. Really cool prospect, flashy type player with raw ability but a lot of upside. And I think he was a player that, interestingly, the Wise Guys scout prospects own him or did own him. And the Godfathers were in that bidding war, and that would be buying from their own scouting agency, an in-house developed prospect. But Jeff Ray, who's been promoted to the GM with the Red Army franchise. He obviously liked Dmitry Kuzmin, must have just missed him on the open market, and he wanted him. He knew that if the Godfathers won that bidding war, that's who they were taking, because that was their own guy, developed in-house, less payment involved there. So he actually got that bidding war going and outbid the Godfathers to get Dmitry Kuzmin. But I thought we'd see a lot more of that in the second round where, because a lot of the GMs currently in the league are scouts and are passionate scouts that, had their own draft rankings, their own draft list. They weren't going off the NHL rankings. And I just thought we'd see a lot more of that where they're like, okay, we're at pick 40. This is our guy. We're going to get him no matter what. And I don't care what it takes. We don't want pick 41 because we think these other 4 franchises might have our guy, and he's the best guy on the board here. We want him. We're going to go get him. That's what would happen in the NHL. If they opened up a 5-spot bidding war in the NHL, there would be some teams would still move back and accumulate, trade down and get 2 picks instead of 1. But if you're in that bidding war, there would be bidding wars in the NHL in the second round because they trust their scouting staff has the best guy, and they also fear that those 4 other franchises have the same guy at the top of their list, and you don't want to miss out and take your number 2 guy if your number 1 guy is actually more valuable and more coveted in your list and your mind. So I think we'd see a lot more bidding wars in the NHL, and I think in future years as franchises and scouts continue to grow and trust each other and build those relationships, I think you're going to see franchises go to their scout and say, who's our top guy and do we need him at this spot? And they're going to say yes, and you're going to see some, maybe 4-figure bidding wars in the second round where it's just a matter of 2 guys they think they want the same guy, and who's going to step up to get that pick spot to make sure you get the guy you want. And we didn't really see that. We saw a lot of one-off bids. Somebody bids, maybe they get bid up once, and then, okay, we'll hope our guy falls to the next spot, or if not, we'll just take the next guy on the NHL selection order list, or there's enough good guys in this range, we'll take whoever we can get. But there wasn't a lot of bidding wars where you could tell the scout and the franchise were really passionate about, we need this guy right here, right now. We don't want to lose him. Let's step up and win this bidding war. There wasn't a lot of that, which was a bit of a surprise because we've seen it in the first round, but not the second round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of those first round bids were really fun, and then the intrigue after of where the pick. We're all watching that chat to see what the actual pick was. So how we'll do things tonight is I'll throw up some graphics of some teams we want to discuss, and maybe throw a couple of questions at you and get your analysis on it. I don't want to. I'm not going to critique a whole lot of my fellow GMs, but I might chime in here and there. But I'll kind of steer you into that, except for the very first team we're doing. You get to ask all the questions on the very first team that we're doing, which is my team, Duckman's Domination. And I'll tell you this, I have the privilege to pick the brain of Craig Button every single week about different players. And I'll be honest, there's sometimes a personal bias about the high-level prospects that we're looking at because Craig has picked them out and, Trish has those. But one thing I have learned, a couple things I've really learned from Craig is don't scout with a tape measure, and there's no such thing as off the board. It might be off your list, which is, happen a lot. Guys, there's players on this list on this screen that people were probably saying, well, he took that person higher than I did. So there's no big off the board list. And I think a list is very important. And you and I talked about this, about going into it after the NHL draft. Were people going to react to the NHL draft or stick with their list? Well, I will tell you this honestly, swear on my late mother's grave, not 8 of the 9 players we selected were in our top 33 on our list. That to me is sticking with your list. So we had 8 of the only guy that wasn't was Josh Doan. I know Craig is really high on him, so I'm going with his advice. But of all these players, we had these guys ranked in our top 33. That's the definition of sticking with your list.
I think that's super important, Dean, and I've been guilty of that in the past, being in a lot of dynasty leagues over the years, and as a scout, I have my own personal rankings going back to 2012, going into the NHL draft. The NHL draft happens, the fantasy rookie draft starts, and you're swayed by the NHL selection order, by those results, and maybe you go away from your rankings, think, if this guy went in the first round and I had him in the third round, he must be good, I'll take him. And I've been burned on that a lot, where if I would have just stuck to my own personal rankings and trusted my gut instincts, I would have come out ahead. So I like the fact that you guys stuck to the list and selected based on Craig's rankings. And I see a guy like Nikita Chibrikov there as certainly a first-round talent. I had him in my top 15 on my personal rankings. He fell because of the program he's in Russia and whether or not you can sign him or he becomes a Kirill Kaprizov. And or Artemi Panarin doesn't come over till he's 25 kind of thing. So, but in general, Dean, I think that's the point you're trying to make there, is that sticking to the list and really trusting your scouting staff is very important. But when you look at that list, I see some high upside guys, Chibrikov being one of them, Logan Stankoven, who in my opinion went way too late in the NHL draft, Shea Byam down at the bottom. I think he's a guy that is just scratching the surface. How much did you guys, when you made this list and when you went into the draft prep, because Duckmans might still be 2 or 3 years away from contention? I mean, I think William Eklund is pretty developed prospect because he's playing in the SHL against men and having a lot of success there. He might jump into the NHL, if not next year, the year after with San Jose. But how much of this draft strategy was looking, at upside and guys that could boom 2, 3, 4 years down the road versus taking the best player available as of today, I guess you could say?
Yeah, our whole strategy was we're not even inviting any of these guys to training camp, actually. Like, we've told them all, just stay away for a while. It's, like when the Dallas Stars and Craig Button drafted Morrow, and they, so we're going to be sending you home from training camp right away, right? We're making it clear that these guys need to go home and concentrate on getting better. So we're not expecting any of these guys to be on our roster next year, possibly the year after that. So that was a big part of just, which guys can we take? Which players can we take that are going to be the best NHL players when they get there? Which guys do we see on a development curve that we really, really like? So that's what we went with. Eklund and Chibrikov, just total skill, right? We just went for kind of really, really skilled. And then our strategy was, going into this, we had 5 first-round picks. We were going to take 2 players from high-level scouting. We already knew that our plan was to take at least 2 players in the first round. So that's where Bolduc and Corson Ceulemans come in. I think Bolduc is a guy that, maybe he's not going to be the highest point producer, but he's going to play in a lot of really good situations. And we, Craig is really high on Corson Ceulemans. And, the strategy with that is I just kept bidding those guys high and high because I knew I could buy them really cheaply, the 10% thing, because I have an affiliation with High Level Scouting and my wife and I share the same bank account. I thought, and this is the cool intrigue of the draft, I thought George really wanted Corson Ceulemans, so I kept bidding it up, knowing I had a limit, and I had a limit for Bolduc that I wouldn't go over as well, and then, High Level takes the profit. And that was our strategy with Trish and I, is we'll bid this guy up really high, hoping the other team takes them. If they don't, we can still get that guy at another time, or we could take the profit. The consolation prize is I get 2 really good players. So that was the strategy on those guys, and I just could not pass up the skill of Logan Stankoven, who I think I paid a little bit, a really good price for him as well. So that was kind of the story and the strategy of us in the first round of, who is going to be the guy that's going to be able to step into our lineup in a couple of years when, hopefully another high-level prospect like Shane Wright is ready to step in as well. We are fully expecting to be in the Shane Wright sweepstakes next year. We have said all along that 2023 is kind of the year we aim to really start competing. We've tried a couple of times to fast track it, but I think this is clear the path that we're definitely on now. Now, not having said that, some of these guys could be trade chips down the road as well if we feel like we should fast track it, but that's the game plan, and that was the kind of the round 1 strategy.
Talk about the bidding war for first overall, Dean, because you were holding the first overall pick. You got William Eklund, who on my personal list was the top forward available for 2021. I struggled with that decision all year long. I had Kent Johnson at number 1. I had Dylan Gunther at number 1, and I ended up with William Eklund in my final rankings as the top forward. But those 3, as well as Matty Beniers, were very close in that tier. And obviously Mason Mctavish pushed his way into that tier as well. But you must have been happy to get William Eklund at 6th. But talk about that bidding, because you were in from 1 to 6. You were in the bidding, and you could have bought first overall, and you sort of slid down the draft order to 6th. But talk about those bidding wars and what was going through your head as 1 to 5 played out.
Well, what was going through my head when 1 played out is I knew that nobody was going to outbid the Can West from the Generals from getting that player, right? I don't think that there was going to be an outbid. we kind of figured who it was going to be. I was really surprised a little bit, and this is where the auction thing comes in, right? Is that you're looking at, players and people and how teams evaluate different things differently. So to see, and smart play though, if you can get a price where you're going to look at a player like the Royals did. But I was pretty surprised, to be honest with you, about the selection compared to what my list is. Not saying it's right or wrong. I was thrilled when I was bidding on Eklund in that spot. And, we had different levels of money for each player that we were willing to, or each, spot that we were willing to spend. So when Owen Power went, okay, we go on to the next level of money that we were willing to spend. And, it's like going to a casino. You got to stick to your limit or else you're not going to have any cash left over when you got to pay. So there was a lot of strategy involved in that. I was thrilled. I was like, if there would have been a podium, I'd have been running to it to announce William Eklund. So very, very happy how it worked out. I had him, I think we had him in number 3 on our list of total players. So was really thrilled at how it worked out to be able to get Eklund.
Yeah, that was exciting to see the selection order play out versus, like I said, last year where you were following the NHL selection order. If you lose the bid, you're kind of, crossing your fingers they don't take the guy you're after. And then when you look at the full listing, because you said everybody but Josh Doan was in your top 33, which player was it? Shea Byam? I know he's a high school kid with a ton of upside coming out of Shattuck or out of U.S. high school. Was it a guy like that, or was it obviously he played in the USHL this year, Shea Byam, but was it somebody like Shea Byam, or was it Simon Robertson, who obviously fell in the NHL draft as well? But which one of those guys were you happiest to see available at that draft spot? Maybe who's your I don't know if you want to say favorite pick out of these guys, but which one were you when you stepped up into the bidding room and you had a chance to get one of these guys that maybe fell from spot to spot you were surprised about? Just talk about who were you surprised was still there at that spot when you jumped into the bidding?
Shea is that guy that, on my personal list of what we did, he was like the number 33. So I was surprised. I got really excited talking with Craig about him on one of our recent episodes. Josh Doan is awesome. I got to draft the last remaining tie to the Winnipeg Jets that was still playing in the NHL. I got to draft Shane Doan's son. I mean, me being a guy who grew up 2 hours from Winnipeg, that's pretty cool for me. Plus, he's a really good player. But Daniil Chaika is the guy I was really excited about. I targeted him on day 2. I went into day 2 with a list of 10 names, and I got 3 of them, I think it was, or something like that. So I was really, really happy. 4 of them we got. Doan was the only guy not on our list that we went out and got. But I was really happy, and what I did throughout the whole draft is, and I think you have to do this, and I'm not worried about giving away a strategy because hopefully it'll change over time, but I would have 2 or 3 guys at that spot that I wanted, and I would do some bidding, but I wouldn't get serious in the bidding until one of those guys was gone, and then I only had a choice of one of them. Or if it was a list of 3, I would wait until it was down, and then I would get really... But if I had a guy that I really liked, I'm going to get aggressive. If I have 3 guys I really liked, I'm going to be like, okay, when with Chabrikov, I was also looking at Tuamala because I there was different guys, and so you would have different players in different spots that I was looking at. Stankoven was another guy in that situation. Carson Lambos was a guy as a defenseman. So I always had different guys in slots that when one was taken, I could go down to the next one, and if I needed to increase or get more aggressive, I could. But Chaika and Robertson, 2 guys I was really excited to get at I think decent prices in the second round.
Yeah, that made my day to see Logan Stankoven be the final name drafted on night 1 in the UFHL, because I really think he deserved to go on night 1 in the NHL as well. I'm a big fan of Logan Stankoven, so that was the pick from Duckmans that really stood out to me. And I love the quote-unquote reach on Nikita Chibrikov, because obviously the talent indicates in my rankings that he was a top 15 talent and obviously fell for the KHL Russian factor. I think the Winnipeg Jets got a huge steal in the second round, and I think Duckman's down the road where you took him in the first round is going to prove to be probably even there will prove to be a little low on Chibrikov if he lives up to his potential. I think he'll actually prove to be better than where Duckman's even took him in this draft class for for his ability level, and I like him better than Fyodor Svechkov, although I had them neck and neck in my rankings. But overall, if you're grading, and I don't like doing winners and losers at this point, and we're not going to get into that on this show because we're talking winners and losers 5 years from now, not 48 hours after the draft. But I look at Duckmans, and if I was giving a grade, I would honestly, and this isn't just because I'm on the air with Dean, but I would give this, based on my own rankings, certainly a passing grade and high-end grade, leaning towards the A region of grading, because I do think you got a lot of value at a lot of spots. And I think the players that you quote-unquote reached on and took higher than their NHL draft selection spot, I think those players are going to, in the years to come, are going to outplay their NHL draft spot as well. So I like what Duckmans did in the 2021 UFHL entry draft auction.
Well, just on that note, I will grade us on getting the players that we wanted, getting 8 out of 9 on our top 33. I would give us a B+. If we would have got 9 out of 9, I think we'd be into that A area. But just on that, but you're right, winners and losers at the draft are not great. And anything less than a B, Larry, I would have just muted your mic for the rest of the show. And so then it would have been really, really boring. But enough about Duckmans. Let's talk about the Tornadoes. And as we mentioned, Rob has a really cool system of that. We'll let him explain. But another team that went in like us with a lot of assets. Strangely, another team that wants to get rid of the second round, even though they had a lot of second round picks in this draft. But thoughts on what Rob and the Tornadoes did?
Yeah, Fanalytica is an amazing tool for tracking prospects and analytics, analyzing the data and the trends and based on historical data, which prospects are going to trend up the best from the NHL draft classes. And there's 3 names I can do this 2 ways. I can highlight the 3 names that for me were reaches on my list, but obviously NHL teams saw it the same way, and Rob wouldn't have picked them. Rob wouldn't vary from Fanalytica's data. I know that. So guys like Tyler Boucher at 10th overall, both in the UFHL and the NHL, everybody thought that was a big reach for the Ottawa Senators. His dad is the goaltender, Brian Boucher, former goaltender, not the water boy, Adam Sandler's character, but the goaltender, Tyler Boucher. I think, he's a power forward guy. A lot of people are always looking for the next Tom Wilson, and you don't want the next Tyler Biggs, right? You want the next right. Tom Wilson. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops, but he's a big, strong kid who has that prototypical power forward. And Ottawa went really heavy on the grit with their early picks. And then obviously one thing I'll say to Tyler Boucher is Rob Love with Fanalytica, he held his cards close to his chest for the final rankings. He didn't submit, but to show his hand on how Fanalytica had the prospects ranked. But at the mid-season rankings for the UFFS scouts, Rob did have Tyler Boucher high on his list of his top 64, and I believe he was the only scout who had Tyler Boucher in the top 64. And in the final rankings, I think, again, only one scout, I believe it was Trevor Zimmer from Five Eyes Scouting, had Boucher in the top 64, 1 out of 7, and he was in the latter part of the second round. So according to the consolidated rankings, Tyler Boucher was a reach, but obviously according to Fanalytica and what the Ottawa Senators seen in his upside, that was a solid pick. The other 2 guys that jump out that way that were earlier than I expected was Wyatt Johnston, who didn't play really at all other than the U18s, and the OHL obviously didn't have a season. Dallas took him in the first round ahead of a guy like Logan Stankoven, who Dallas took in the second round with their first of 2 picks in the second round. I would have probably flipped those 2 personally. And then Riker Evans, an overage defenseman from WHL Regina, who has some offensive ability, not quite to the level of an Olin Zellweger, but has some offensive upside, plays a physical game. Kind of one of those guys, though, that when Seattle picked him, even on the NHL broadcast, everybody looked at each other, including Sam Cosentino, a UFFS scout, and was like, wow, where did that come from? They didn't see Riker Evans, maybe a 5, 6, 7 round pick. Nobody's seen him going early on day 2. So those picks, Boucher, Johnston, and Evans were, according to consolidated rankings, off the board picks. But again, Rob's trusting the Fanalytica tool, and obviously maybe those NHL teams, Ottawa, Dallas, and Seattle, are among Rob's subscribers on Fanalytica, because they obviously seen it the same way. But on the flip side, prospects that Rob targeted late that I really like their upside, his last 2 picks especially, I think those have a great chance to perform well for the Tornadoes and become NHL players. Sasha Pastujov in Anaheim, and Arten Martino in Dallas. I think both those picks were great fits for the NHL teams that they went to, and I think the fact that the Tornadoes identified them didn't surprise me at all based on just my personal rankings, but also knowing that Fanalytica can spit out data on these kids that show that they were probably underestimated. And I bet you Rob had those two closer to his top 33 as well, and was very happy to be announcing their names at 44 and 53. And then his other three first round picks, Cole Sillinger, Oscar Olesen, and Samu Tuomello. I think all three of those picks are trending up as scoring wingers who will hit a lot of categories. In the UFHL, Sillinger likes to play physical. Olesen's got some grit to him. And all three are volume shooters. And obviously in a fantasy league where shots count at a decent weighting, I think those three, and that's where Boucher as well, he'll be a volume shooter. So I think based on the UFHL scoring system, I think his first round picks, those forwards, can hit a lot of categories. So all in all, I think Tornadoes had a solid draft, but much like the NHL, they were the franchise that sort of went away from the pre-draft consensus by grabbing guys like Boucher, Johnston, and Evans that a lot of mock drafts didn't have in their first round or their top 50.
Yeah, this one was interesting to me, and again, it goes back to everybody has their own board. I love the Tuomello pick at 30, and I said, as I mentioned, we were looking at that guy. If Chabrikov would have been taken, then Tuomello would have been one of those guys we went to at the next level. And you look at, I talked earlier about, it takes just a bit of a bidding war. Chabrikov goes for 265, Tuomello goes for 285. And Chabrikov was 26, Tuomello was 30. So the bidding wars behind after, it doesn't matter. You just need the franchise to get in there. But I absolutely love that pick. Everybody has a different board. I would have had Tuomello ranked higher than Olesen, but I value Rob's in his system and what he's looking at, and I love it. And Pastujov is a guy that we had on our top 10 going into on Saturday, or on Sunday rather, their Saturday, our Sunday, day number 2, round number 2. He was a guy that he was on our list that I was going to be bidding on, if maybe Simon Robertson wasn't available, and even he's not on this list, but a lot of people were looking at Ratty and saying he's going to lose some money this year, and there was a bidding war for him that ended up bringing in him. So you just never know kind of what happens in an auction. But I like Rob. He went for some, same thing you talked about, guys that are going to put pucks on net and hopefully score a lot of goals. And we had a similar situation of just trying to get highly skilled guys. So I like what Rob did with the volume of picks.
For sure. And Samu Tuomello is one of two guys that I highlighted. I had them in the mid-20s. Actually, I had Oscar Olesen, Isaac Rosen, and Samu Tuomello, all three grouped together from, I think it was 25, 26, 27 in my personal rankings. And in my final thoughts on my personal rankings, I said Isaac Rosen and Samu Tuomello are two guys that, following the U18s and seeing the damage they did there and their ability to score big goals, I thought their stock should have went up coming out of the U18 Worlds, and I really thought both Rosen and Tuomello would have went probably closer to 20 than 30 in the NHL draft. Of course, Isaac Rosen went in the teens to Buffalo, which some saw as a bit of a reach. I think he was 14th overall, and then Tuomello fell all the way down into the lap of Philadelphia in the mid-second round with Philadelphia's first pick because they didn't have a first rounder. So it's just interesting to see how that played out with those type of players. But certainly Samu Tuomello is a guy that he's a finisher. He can finisher, you could say. He's from Finland, and he can shoot the puck. He's got a good one-timer, and he's another volume shooter that I think is going to score 20 goals in the NHL on a fairly consistent basis in his prime. So I did like that selection as well. And I think Cole Sillinger is a guy that along with Logan Stankoven, I think they're somewhat similar volume shooting, goal scoring guys come the NHL level. I think both Sillinger and Stankoven will be guys that trend up. And so I like that pick for Rob as well at 13. I think he'll be very happy with Cole Sillinger. And I personally wouldn't be surprised if we look back on this draft and Rob comes out happier with the Cole Sillinger at 13 than he does at Tyler Boucher at 10.
All right, so the Tornadoes got into make it their first pick at 10. The Snipers a couple of picks later at 12. And I look at this list and I see two guys at one point in conversation for the first overall pick. At Atu Ratty, as we mentioned, it was last year the consensus number one pick. And at one point on track in the draft, I asked Craig who could go first overall this year, and he said Owen Power and Dylan Gunther. So a guy who was also considering Dylan Gunther at that spot, and obviously things change as you go, but they get two guys that should be highly motivated.
Yeah, if Alex LeBlanc and Marcus Borkowski are going into the draft with a BPA board, a best player available board, Dylan Gunther, the 9th overall pick in the NHL, falls to 12 in the UFHL. Simon Edvinsson, the 6th overall pick in the NHL, falls to 15th in the UFHL. And so the value at those spots for those prospects could be huge value. And certainly Atu Ratty, like I said, a year ago, we'd be talking about him as the number one prospect going into the draft. I think he's primed for a bounce back, as we're already seeing in these summer hockey showcases. I think Ratty is out to prove a lot of people wrong that he fell into the 50s in the second round, and I don't think that's a reach by any means. And it didn't surprise me that there was a bidding war to start day two, and he was the first pick of day two by the Snipers. So I look at those first three picks as great value where the Snipers got them. And then the last two picks, these are the high school defensemen from Minnesota, Scott Morrow from Shattuck St. Mary's and Jack Pert, again, a Minnesota guy. I think especially Pert going to his hometown team, the Minnesota Wild, and Carolina develops a ton of good defensemen, so they like what they see in Scott Morrow. I think both those picks they're very raw. They're probably not going to play for the Snipers for upwards of 5 years, but the upside there coming out of college for those two guys is going to be very high for the future of the blue line of the Snipers. And the Snipers already had a great prospect core with guys like Cole Perfetti and Cole Caulfield, obviously, and you get Dylan Gunther in there as another guy who likes to shoot the puck. So bright future for the Snipers, and I think they got very good value with their first three picks, and I like the guys they targeted with their last two picks as really high upside defensemen.
So it's interesting. I had talks with Alex on Sunday about a second-round pick. He was looking to get, a couple of picks. We had talks about Marcus Peterson. I just wasn't prepared to give up the two picks that they wanted. But he ended up getting an earlier pick, and he said in one of the chats, you don't get the pick if you don't buy something. You don't buy the pick and not bid or something. Well, he certainly got his money's worth with that bid. He identified his player, and that's what this is about, is you identify that player and you don't let him get away if you don't want to. But I thought tremendous deals to get Simon Edvinsson at $600. I wasn't expecting the bidding war for Ratty at number 33. What did you think about how that was unfolding, and did you think it was going to be the former number one prospect for the draft that he was selecting at 33?
I did. And three of the five bidders at 33 were taking Atu Ratty. I think that's why there was a bidding war. And I thought we'd see more of that in the second round. As I mentioned earlier, I thought guys would be afraid that other franchises were looking at the same guy at the same spot, that, especially when you're looking at guys like Shea Byam down in the 50s that were, drafted up in the 30s in the NHL. You have to be thinking, okay, somebody else, he's the highest guy available on the NHL board, and he's falling here. Somebody else wants him. If I want him, I got to step up and outbid these other franchises to get him. So I thought we'd see a lot more bidding wars in the second round based on franchises doing exactly like Alex said. If I acquire the pick and I have somebody in mind, I'm going to get him. And he might have went to $500 on Atu Ratty. Who knows where his breaking point was there. But certainly he identified his target and he went and got him. And I'm actually less surprised that happened. The first pick of day two is always you have a night to sleep on it, and there's a lot of suspense, and a lot of people every franchise sort of has their target going into day two because you've had a chance to regroup and redo your board, reevaluate your board. So I'm not surprised it was Atu Ratty, and I'm more surprised that maybe some other picks in the 30s and 40s didn't generate similar bidding wars and were sort of a limited bidding, because I thought there would have been other people looking at the NHL results and saying, hey, I really want this guy here. I'm going to step up and get him and not wait a pick or two and hope he keeps falling. I'm going to do what it takes to get this guy now. And obviously that's what Alex did in the Snipers. And again, just looking at that list and the value that could come there based on their NHL draft position and where they were ranked a year ago or at points during the season. 12 for Gunther, 15 for Edvinsson, 33 for Ratty. I think all three of those guys have a good chance of outperforming their UFHL draft position for the Snipers.
Yeah, we had a few talks with some teams about those second round picks, and for that reason alone, because the draft is unpredictable, I was counting on guys that I had high still being there, and they were, but that's really important when you get that pick to not just sit there and let the player that you're wanting kind of go by the wayside. All right, let's now get to the kind of pretty big spender here, the Generals going after some picks. Now, the caveat is that they're smart, like a lot of teams, and you get an affiliation with a scouting agency. As I said, we went after 2 prospects that we knew were going to do this, and this is why I knew, I just wanted them to pay a little bit more money for Owen Power, so I kept bidding. I knew I wasn't going to get Owen Power, so sorry, I might get a bill from the Generals at some point, but you just got to get kind of the bidding up, and I know that they're only paying 10%, so it was not a surprise what they did with number 1. What about the other picks? We were certainly happy as far as high-level scouting in our affiliation, and there was a big whoop let out by Trish Millard when I told her Jesper Walstad had gone off. But what about the 4 picks that the Generals made?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, Dean. I think Curtis Johnson and the Generals certainly had a strategy coming in, and that strategy started a couple months ago when they acquired the entire prospect pool of Ruby ISS, Harrison Millar, who obviously he was the biggest investor going back to last year's futures auction. Among the early adopters, Ruby ISS spent the most, they invested the most, and the Generals and CanWest Scouting Agency, their scouting agency, identified that and said, hey, look at the stable of prospects that Ruby ISS has here. Harrison was sort of liquidating, he had sold off Connor Bedard and Brad Lambert and some of these guys, and Matvey Mishkov, like he had that much talent going, and CanWest stepped up and said, hey, what do you want for all of them? We're willing to take them all. We'll bring you into a consultant position. We want to get these guys in our, kind of that in-house environment, right, where they're sort of developing in your pipeline. So you look at their top 3 picks there, Power, Mctavish, and Clark, all 3 of those players came from CanWest Scouting. They're affiliate scouts, so they're only paying 10% on those prices. And Mason Mctavish, Dean, was actually the highest selling prospect in the at 4th overall, was the highest selling prospect in the 2021 UFHL entry draft auction at $2,500. And I don't know who was bidding up there or if they were after Mctavish, but obviously the Generals, knowing Mctavish went 3rd in the NHL, and knowing that he was already in their stable with CanWest, they didn't want to hear McTavish's name and then have to spend that extra 90% on another prospect. So they ran up that bidding war and secured their guy with Mason Mctavish and came back and got Brant Clark at the same spot that Los Angeles took him. And then the pick that closed out the top 10, all 4 of their picks were in the top 10, was 9th overall, Jesper Walstad, who fell to 20th in the NHL, Dean. Product of high-level scouting, but that's about where the consensus sort of thought he was, even in the weeks leading up to the draft. A lot of people thought he could be a top 10, possibly even a franchise closer to the top 5 would take a chance on him, and it was somewhat surprising that Sebastian Casa was the first goalie drafted in the teens ahead of Jesper Walstad at 20th, and obviously the Edmonton Oilers actually traded down from that spot so Minnesota could come up and take Walstad. But I think the Generals, identified Walstad probably as their top goalie heading into the entry auction, and really, when they're down to their last pick that they own at 9th overall, let's, we got 2 defensemen, we got a forward, let's take our goaltender here, our top-ranked goaltender, and I'm sure although Sebastian Casa went the pick before in the UFHL as well, so both goalies went in the top 10, which isn't overly surprising in fantasy drafts because every fantasy franchise needs their future starting goaltender. But I think Jesper Walstad at 9th, even though he went 20th in the NHL draft, is going to prove to be a strong value pick there, and he could outperform that draft position even at 9th, let alone 20th.
Yeah, it was a clear mandate that they had, and a very smart mandate that they had, because, they've already paid for these players. They've identified them. That was the same thing that we did, trusting the same scout. It's not like Craig Button, the high-level scout, is going to give different advice about a player because he's wearing a Duckman's hat. He's going to say, in a lot of trade conversations, I would ask Craig, and he'd be very, very blunt about yes or no, and that's exactly what you want. You identify those players in a scouting situation like Curtis and Ken West did, and you've already done the homework on those. You already like those players. Now, I'm not saying you take a guy ahead of another really skilled guy if the gap is really wide, but if it's close, why wouldn't you do that? And then for them to go out. Now, how much do you think Kosa going right before made them jump in and say, okay, let's get our goalie now in case there's a run on these couple of guys?
Yeah, both the fact that Kosa went right before, I think that put the pressure on that, there's only one other first-round talent goaltender in Walstad. And not only that, I think the fact that was their last pick of the first round, they had their 2D, their forward. I'm sure they identified that they'd like to come out of this draft with a goaltender because they don't necessarily have a great goaltending prospect on the protected list for the Generals. So I think that was a priority coming in, but certainly the fact that Kosa went right before the goaltenders going back-to-back in the top 10 wasn't a huge surprise to me. When I saw Kosa go, I knew it was sooner than later for Walstad, so I like that. But like you said, Dean, the interesting thing will be that Mason Mctavish pick, in my opinion, at fourth. Obviously, he went third in the NHL draft. Matty Beniers and William Eklund, both owned by Spitfire Scouting, not property of Can West. They went at 5 and 6, I believe, in the UFHL entry draft auction. So they took Mason Mctavish ahead of Matty Beniers, who obviously went second in the NHL ahead of Mctavish at third. So it'll be interesting to see. You're investing in yourself, but are you taking the best player available in Mason Mctavish, or are you letting a potential bigger or better contributor for the Generals down the road in Matty Beniers or obviously, like we said, William Eklund, who ended up with Duckmans? Would have those two been more of an impact player, a franchise player for the Generals than Mason Mctavish? And that was the decision there. Do you pay the extra 90% to get a player that's owned by a different scout, but might have a bigger impact as a face of the franchise for the Generals? Or do you stay in-house, take Mason Mctavish, who, again, was a top 5 pick in the NHL draft? It's not like he's a huge reach. He went third in the NHL, fourth in the UFHL, so that's not a reach by any means. But you did pass up the second overall pick in the NHL and another high-end guy in William Eklund. So it'll be interesting to see how that decision to stick with your in-house guy and Mason Mctavish plays out, having passed up on Matty Beniers and William Eklund.
Yeah, and I think at some point, like early in the draft, it's almost splitting hairs. The player that you're saving a lot of money on is almost just as good, or if not, in some cases, just as good as the other player you're choosing from. As you get deeper into the draft and there's a bit more of a gap, you really have to be asking yourself about that. Okay, the team that legally worked the draft last year and got so many picks for $25 under new management, under new ownership, the new Red Army with Mooch and Thomas and 7Cs leading the charge, and Jeff Ray working the management. Congratulations on Jeff on getting that job. That was an excellent promotion. And, I was getting pretty excited when I kept seeing somebody not take Matty Beniers, and I ended up getting in there at number 6. I was trying to get in there at number 5, but they outbid me in that situation. I love the picks that they made, especially those first two. I had as an affiliation, I want Jesper Walstad to get drafted, but I'm a big fan of Kosa. So I like what Jeff Ray and the new Red Army did.
Absolutely, Dean. And I think you're right on the splitting hair, especially with the top forward in this year's draft class. As I mentioned, I wavered on that from the preliminary rankings in December to the midseason rankings in April to the final rankings in July. Whether that was, I started off with Kent Johnson, and then I went to Dylan Gunther, and then I went to William Eklund, and Matty Beniers was always right there in that 2, 3, 4 range. And those guys were, and Mason Mctavish played his way into that group, but they were so close together. And I think you're right about splitting hairs, but it will be interesting to see who ends up with who becomes the best forward from this draft class. I think that's one of the big questions in the NHL here too. And the fact Matty Beniers went to Seattle, they need that face of the franchise, right? That's their first ever draft pick, second overall, and he's a really mature kid, Matty Beniers. He's not far from being NHL ready. He skates extremely well. He's a great leader. He reminds a lot of people of Jonathan Taves, or maybe, if not Jonathan Taves, maybe he's a step below like a Dylan Larkin, but he's not going to be this high-end explosive leading the NHL scoring race, but just a great two-way player that hits a lot of categories in the UFHL. And I think Red Army and Jeff Ray, I'm sure they just went best player available there, because why there's no point to reach. If they thought Matty Beniers was the best player available, he went second in the NHL. He's available at fifth in the UFHL. That's probably one of those you don't have to overthink it. You just step up and take the best player. But then at 8 to take Sebastian Cossa, who obviously some were surprised he went as high as he did in the mid-teens in the NHL. But again, you're looking at Detroit. You're looking at Stevie Yzerman. You're looking at a franchise on the rise. Red Army, though, what I will say, Dean, is you look at their goaltending pipeline. They already have Igor Shesterkin, and they already have Ilya not Samsonov, where am I going with that? Yaroslav Askarov. Sorry, I get my Russian goaltenders mixed up sometimes. But they got Igor Shesterkin and Yaroslav Askarov, the top goaltender from last year. So to come back with a goaltender this year and have that three-headed monster with Sebastian Cossa, it did kind of surprise me that they went goaltender there versus defense or forward, especially because, he was 14th in the NHL draft and he jumped up to 8th in the UFHL when you already have Shesterkin and Askarov. That was a bit of a surprise pick to me, but I'm a big Sebastian Cossa fan. I know you're in Edmonton. You see a lot of that game in his draft -1 year. He had a 1-0 shutout here in Kelowna. I was there live, and I said right then and there, at that time he was sort of a second round kind of price. I said, this guy's a first-round talent. He's going to jump up. And then, again, you go down the list, and I look at guys with opportunity. Zach Dean, I think that's a player that's going to fit somewhere in Vegas. I think he's a quality-type guy that Vegas will look at. Again, they took him 10 spots higher than Vegas did, so they were definitely going off their own draft rankings and their list too, which Jeff Ray, is certainly a very qualified scout to come up with a franchise's draft list. But that was 10 spots higher than Vegas took Zach Dean. And then the pick that we've already discussed, the bidding war for Dmitry Kuzmin, who was a third-round pick in the NHL, but just a guy who has, he might turn into a bust. He's kind of a boomer bust kid, but his ceiling is sky high. He could be a real entertaining NHL player in the years to come. So overall, I like what the Red Army did. I think they went with their best player available at 5, and then 8 and 17 and 60 were picks that I think they really worked off their own list. A bit surprising to see the goaltender at 8, considering they had Shesterkin and Askarov already in-house. But nonetheless, I think one of those 3 will become a very attractive trade chip for Red Army if they decide to move Shesterkin or Askarov or Cossa in the years to come.
Well, and that's what you could do, right? You're accumulating assets that are either going to make your team better on the ice with you or make your team better through improving it through trades. And I was looking at this as, it's clear there was a drop off after the 6 financially in the UFHL draft. And it could have very easily been William Eklund at 5 and Matty Beniers at 6 for Duckmans and in Red Army, because that was, the Matty Beniers auction got to a point where, okay, we're going to bow out because we got another guy we're going to bid on right away, and that's the important of that list. But it could have been the either way. If they would have taken Eklund, then we would have been going hard on Beniers. So for them, I think to have Matty Beniers at number 5, I think that's phenomenal. Like nothing against any of the other picks, but I had Matty Beniers as probably the top forward going into this draft. So I think that's an exceptional pick, and it all depends on how much you want to spend and how many guys you have left on your list. Like, you look after William Eklund, it drops down to just over $1,400 for Brant Clark. So that's almost a $500 drop. So it was kind of clear that teams had identified, okay, this is a guy I need to bid for.
Yeah, for sure. And in addition to a bit of a surprise that they went with the goaltender in the top 10 at 8th, considering the goaltending pipeline they already had, the other surprise here for me, Dean, is the first 3 picks are North American prospects. And I know Jeff Ray, he's a scout in the real world, but he scouts primarily in Europe. He lives on the border of France and Switzerland. He scouts Switzerland heavily live in-person viewings. But he's also sort of a crossover scout for that Sweden-Finland area, and he scouts a lot of those prospects. So he would have seen a lot of William Eklund and Samu Tuomelo and Isaac Rosen and some of these guys that were available at those spots that maybe a little surprising that Red Army didn't have a bit more European flair to their selections, their 4 picks. They did get Dmitry Kuzmin, who's obviously a flashy European defenseman, but I was a bit surprised that the first 3 picks were all North Americans, considering their general manager and head scout is a very involved European hockey scout.
Indeed, it was just fun seeing. I think that's a really smart pick at the end. You know, you're late second round. Why not take a chance on a guy with that upside? The next team we're going to talk about was interesting because they took Kent Johnson, number 2, and this is the Royals that we're talking about, and strategy played in because it was a $1,500 purchase, and then Luke Hughes went after that for $2,000. The weird strategy was they bid against each other. They bid against themselves. I mean, if we had the Taco Award for the draft from the show The League, the Royals are getting it because they bid against themselves. I mean, that's like bidding 101, but they got some great players. They were in and out really quickly, and I guess they were just leaving a tip for the UFFS. I'm not sure.
No doubt. Yeah, I think Arnie and Brent there, the double-headed monster, the management team for the Royals, I think they got a little trigger happy. Saw the guy they wanted, and then they both figured we better get in there and bid before the clock winds down, and let's not let somebody else walk away with either of those guys, Kent Johnson or Luke Hughes. They're going to be teammates next year at or next season at the University of Michigan, which obviously is going to be a ridiculously stacked favorite to win the Frozen Four next season. But yeah, I think Kent Johnson, as far as if you're looking at the most skilled forward in the draft class, he might have the highest ceiling, the most upside. I think I think Craig Button compared him to Elias Pettersson. He's got that kind of skill set, but then at the same time, he could be a Jonathan Drouin or a Nikolai Ehlers type guy that just never quite gets to that high level. But he's got a very high ceiling. He could be Elias Pettersson. He could be, trying to think of another guy. I know I threw out to Brent another name that I really compared him to, but again, one of the real high-level skilled forwards in the NHL potentially, but he also could be more of a Jonathan Drouin guy who has all the skill in the world but never quite gets to that level. But I seen Kent Johnson with Trail in the BCHL 2 years ago when he tore it up here, and I really liked him. And obviously the Luke Hughes, Jack Hughes, New Jersey family reunion story, I think that was the absolute best landing spot for Luke Hughes. I don't know if he's going to be as good of a defenseman or as offensive as a defenseman in fantasy as obviously Quinn Hughes is becoming in Vancouver, but he's a bigger kid. He's going to be an impact player, on one of the faces of the franchise for New Jersey going forward, as well as for the Royals. And that's another player there, Dean, that Arnie Entz, who runs Pipeline Prospects, went out, and actually that was when Ruby ISS, when Harrison Millar was sort of liquidating his prospect pool, his impressive stable. Luke Hughes went from Ruby ISS to Pipeline Prospects prior to that sale or that merger with Can West. So that was a player that Arnie Entz identified early, and the Royals weren't going to miss on Luke Hughes. I actually thought they were going to take him at 2. I was a bit surprised they took Kent Johnson from Daltech Scouting Service there, but certainly Kent Johnson is another one of those players that I think, as far as who could be the best player 5 years from now in this draft class, he might have the highest offensive ceiling for fantasy.
They were just trying to make the profit margin look a lot more with Luke Hughes, I guess, when they did all that. But in and out, 2 quality players, 2 high picks, and then their weekend was done. And kind of the opposite for the next team we're going to talk about, the Godfathers. They were just spectators on day one, and then they get into it as the second round moves forward, taking a Canuck and a Tampa Bay Lightning, and the kind of a lot of chatter about Dylan Duke on the chats today. But I guess assess the work that the Godfathers did on day 2.
A long wait for them to get into the bidding, right? Because they had traded away their first round pick in order to upgrade their current talent pool and their active roster. And I like that Daniella Klimovich pick. Not a lot of people knew about him a year ago, but he was a prospect that we had in last summer's futures auction. And he really had his coming out party at the World Under-18s for Belarus. He had a hat trick in that tournament and really proved to be a lethal sniper there. And the Vancouver Canucks have drafted well in recent years. You look at Nils Hoglander in the second round, and I really think Daniella Klimovich has that type of upside as well. I think he's a scoring forward that the Godfathers will be happy with, as well as the Canucks. And you're right, Dylan Duke was a guy who slid in the NHL draft all the way down to the 4th round, which was surprising. But of course, Tampa Bay would step up and take him. Shout out to Al Murray, who's obviously daughter-in-law. Ashley Murray was our inaugural Klein Cup champion, our playoff champion 2 years ago with the Monarchs, or in 2020. But Dylan Duke was a guy that slid in the NHL, But I think the Godfathers looked at the landing spot. Tampa Bay grabbed them. They're great at developing. Their pipeline's been one of the best feeder systems from the AHL to the NHL in recent years. And I think they identified Dylan Duke, and I'm sure they had him in that 50s or 60s range on their own list going into the Nelson Martins would have had a draft board from wise guys prospects that the Godfathers would have been going off, and I'm sure their final rankings that they submitted would have had Dylan Duke a lot higher than where he went in the NHL, and they stuck to it. And certainly, again, you see him with Tampa Bay. Both those prospects, Klimovich with Vancouver and Duke with Tampa Bay, that bodes well for their fantasy potential. So I like both those picks as potential value picks as well.
Well, before I hope people start pulling out the name Braden Point for Tampa Bay for taking a guy really late, and full credit, Braden Point, one of my favorite players to watch in junior, and I know you enjoyed watching him then too as a young 15-year-old even, but remember, the Tampa Bay Lightning took 3 players before they took Braden Point in that draft. They had 2 second-round picks and a first-round pick, and then I think he was later on. So as much as they loved him, they still waited quite a bit to be able to make that pick. But Dylan Duke could be a very fun one to watch for the Godfathers, who didn't have a lot of work to do. They had a lot of watching to do, but then when they made their picks, they made the most of it. Speaking of not a lot of picks, how about the Crypto Knights? The new GM, chomping at the bit to get in there, takes his pick, and then I'm not sure if they decided not to get in any more picks or they were just happy, but I like this player. I certainly like the organization. I think the Winnipeg Jets have done really well with American forwards, even if they've traded some at times. It seems to be a terrific pipeline into Winnipeg from that U.S. program, and the Crypto Knights get an American forward playing for the Jets.
And this is a one and done here, Dean, where it's exactly what we've been talking about throughout the show. The Crypto Knights drafted Chaz Lucius, who was property of Prestige Worldwide, their affiliated scouting agency. Dan Nadeau, the new GM, obviously selected Chaz Lucius. There's the 10% payment. The very next pick is Dylan Gunther at 12th overall. And it's going to be interesting to see, was it worth that? Again, was it worth, Chaz Lucius, I had him, I think, ranked 11th in my rankings, so I don't think that's a reach, but he went 18th in the NHL to Winnipeg and into the teens, and obviously Dylan Gunther was available, who went 9th to Arizona in the NHL draft, so was it worth staying in-house and saving that 90% for Chaz Lucius? Is he going to be a good enough contributor for the Crypto Knights, or was Dylan Gunther, the very next pick in the UFHL entry draft auction, was he the better option, even if it costs you 90% more? Was that the better move to go with the higher consensus, higher rated prospect in Dylan Gunther, who, Dan Nadeau, general manager, obviously is based in Sherwood Park, just outside of Edmonton. He would have seen a lot of Dylan Gunther with the Edmonton Oil Kings. So I don't know on Dan Nadeau's personal rankings whether he had Lucius ahead of Dylan Gunther, or if all things being equal, would if he picked Dylan Gunther? But again, I think the 90% versus 10% for the fee tilts the scale in favor of picking the prospect that is owned in-house by Prestige Worldwide. And I think that's why we've seen Chaz Lucius go ahead of Dylan Gunther at 11th overall. And now the pressure's on Chaz Lucius to make that pick stand up and outperform Dylan Gunther going forward.
Well, but here's the great thing: that NHL fans of NHL teams, they forget things really easily. Like, they don't ever hold up like 1-for-1 or who's Pouliot that the Oilers took instead of Parise. Like, NHL fans, they forget easily. They don't ever bring that stuff up year after year after year. So we'll see what fans of the Crypto Knights do. Like, were they chanting Gunther like Oiler fans, as you talked about on the roundtable, were chanting Doan? By the way, our fans were chanting that, so we had to go with. We didn't want to make the same mistake. That's why Josh Doan is a member of our team. Our fans were chanting Doan, but we're Crypto Knight fans chanting Gunther in that situation. But it's a great thing to be able to watch down the road. And I did it with 2 players. I think it's much easier when you have multiple picks to be able to say, we're going to, maybe this isn't as equal a player, but we're going to save some money. And, if it's splitting hairs and you're close, it's okay. A lot more of a risk, but, good on Dan stepping out there, putting his name out there and saying, hey, we love this guy. We already had him. We know about him. we're going to take him. We're in the process. We're going to save some money and direct that somewhere else. And he puts his stamp on that team right now, relying on the players that were kind of in the affiliation system. So good on Dan to step up and make that pick.
Absolutely, and again, I don't want to knock Chaz Lucius in comparison to Dylan Gunther, because I'm actually really high on Chaz Lucius, and I think if he got a full draft year, Dean, obviously he missed the vast majority of this season to injury. I think he could have been in that top 5 conversation. He's a lethal goal scorer, a real sniper, and you have Cole Perfetti on one wing and Chaz Lucius on the other, and I think people in Winnipeg will forget who Patrick Laine is pretty quick if you got Perfetti and Lucius in the lineup. So I'm a big fan of Chaz Lucius. I think he's a high ceiling prospect, but there might be a little bit more of a boom bust there. I think Dylan Gunther's the safer pick, and I really think Dylan Gunther's going to be a strong pro as well. So all things being equal, I probably would have went Gunther, but totally understandable why they went Lucius, considering he was already in their system and somebody they identified at last summer's futures auction last August, through their affiliated scout, Zach, so with Prestige Worldwide. So the pick made sense, but seeing Dylan Gunther slide that one extra spot, it'll be interesting to see how this pick holds up in 3 to 5 years.
So the Monarchs took a guy at 16 who I thought really slipped. I had this guy higher. When I talked about having groups of players, and I had guys like Beniers and Eklund, as some of these other guys started going, Svechkov was a guy that I was going to be looking at in that 7, 8. If I didn't get 6 in that 7 spot, and so I was surprised that he slipped. I think a lot of goal scoring. Nashville is just screaming for a guy to really be that highly. Like I'm trying to think like who's the highest skilled Nashville player, and I'm not talking about Peter Forsberg, who was there for 5 minutes. I'm like the highest skilled Nashville forward. There's been a lot of great skilled defensemen. So I like that pick at 16. And then, George and I were competing for a lot of different players. I like the pick at 41, Poltapov. I'm not sure if I would have been a Colton Dak guy at 38, but again, has him on his list. And I'm a big fan of 46, the pick they took Ville Koivunen. So give me your thoughts on what George did with the Monarchs, George Batchel.
As far as the highest skilled player with Nashville forward, I think it's the current Forsberg, Philip Forsberg. I think he's got a lot of talent, and then a young guy who some had sort of, it's how development works, right? Some people were sort of writing off Eli Tolvainen, and he didn't have a real high stock coming into last season. He, since his draft year, he's really went up and down, but he really showed he can score at the NHL level last season. So I think Eli Tolvainen is a guy that's trending up. But Fyodor Svechkov and Zachary Larehu were the 2 first-round picks for Nashville this year. And I think they're both they have skill, but I think they're hard-nosed, hard to play against guys. And I really think Fyodor Svechkov, when he gets to the NHL, is going to be more of a two-way force. He gets a bit of the Pavel Datsyuk comparison. I don't think he's as crafty with the puck. I don't think he's as good of a stick handler, a wizard. I don't think he's going to score the shootout goals that Pavel Datsyuk did. But that kind of two-way force, I think, is Fyodor Svechkov. And certainly for the Monarchs, I think he'll be a reliable player. And certainly I do think he will put up some good numbers for fantasy. I look at Isaac Rosen as a guy who has, again, a high ceiling player for fantasy. And then you nailed it with those 2 second-round picks back-to-back, Poltapov and Koivunen. Boomer bust guys, but if they boom, they could be top 6 forwards in the NHL that put up a lot of points. One guy that I'll highlight here, Dean, that I liked was the Stanislav Svozil, Czech Republic defenseman picked by Columbus at 54, or in the UFHL at 54. He was a 3rd-round pick. He fell to the 3rd round in the NHL draft. I really thought he was a borderline first-round talent. Coming into the draft year, I probably had him closer to the top 20. I really like this player. I know one player that Columbus had in the past that sort of fits a similar profile from Czech Republic was Rusty Klesla, Radislav Klesla. I think Stanislav Svozil could develop into that type player. Rusty Klesla was a top 5 pick in the NHL draft way back when, but that type of player, a guy who can contribute some offense but also some snarl. So the fact they identified Stanislav Svozil in the 2nd round in the UFHL, even though he fell to the 3rd round in the NHL, I like that pick by George Batchel, general manager of the Monarchs, and close it out with 2 guys that are have upside as well, Oliver Kapanen and Ryan Winterton. And as we said with Matty Beniers, Seattle's going to need some players that are going to be drafted and developed and become, their future faces of the franchise, especially, Vegas went sort of win now right away and traded away. I mean, now they've even traded Cody Glass, but they traded Nick Suzuki. They traded, Eric Brandstrom. They traded a lot of their early first-round picks that they made in franchise history. They never played for Vegas. Seattle, I think, is going to do the opposite. I think they're going to draft and develop with Matty Beniers, and I do think Ryan Winterton is a guy that they're looking at 3 to 4 to 5 years from now is going to be a key player for Seattle, and he has no other prospects to compete with right now. He's got a straight line to the NHL as long as he keeps trending up. There's no other prospects in that system with Seattle. So anybody that Seattle picked has a little bit of a head start. They don't have that competition from last year's draft or 2 years ago. So I look at the players from Seattle as good fantasy options because they're probably going to get at least a cup of coffee in the NHL and get that chance because there isn't as much internal competition in Seattle. But overall, top to bottom, I think George Batchel added a lot of picks throughout the draft, right? Monarchs don't have a real strong protected list or feeder system. And now George has a scouting agency going with the Regal Scouting Group. So I really think you're going to see George Batchel put his stamp on the Monarchs franchise. And it starts with this 2021 draft class led by Fyodor Svechkov.
Yeah, they were busy and trying to work in different. We ended up. It's so funny. George was my assistant GM, and we ended up in a lot of draft rooms together. So it was kind of neat going up and bidding. And I had a lot of fun bidding. Some of them I didn't intend to bid in it, but I just thought that the price that the team should be paying should have been a certain one. I was very happy when. Players from the scouting agency that we had were selected. So I had really exciting times. One of those guys was from the Titans. Their last pick, Sean Barrens, went to Colorado. I think Trish has already spent the $1,750 she made off of that. She might have went and got a couple ice cream cones or something like that. But that was their last pick. He was a guy that because he was a high-level scouting prospect, he was on our list for day 2. But I also like one of the guys that they took high, number 14. And I don't know, was there a guy who, got more hype as the year and a bit went on than Matt Coronato?
His numbers speak for themselves, right? I mean, he's one of the highest scoring, highest producing players in this draft class. Obviously, the USHL had basically an uninterrupted full season. He played with the high-profile Chicago Steel, who got a lot of spotlights. So lots of reasons to like Matt Coronato, and his stock definitely shot up throughout the draft year. I was born and raised or grew up in an Oilers family, so anybody that Calgary selects, I'm not really allowed to like and compliment the pick, But for the Titans, for Jacob Cambridge, and again, going back to affiliations, the Titans have that affiliation with Spitfire Scouting, who we'll see later had an amazing draft, led all the scouts in the first round. But they targeted some players that were in-house with Spitfire Scouting. And going down the list, Jacob Cambridge is a big Leafs fan. How can you not take Toronto's top overall pick, Matthew Nyes, who actually was trending up at the end of the season? His draft year was very up and down in the USHL. But his stock was going up towards the end of the year as well. So I like the Matthew Nyes pick. I think he can outperform his draft position, joining guys like Nick Robertson in Toronto's system. And then last but not least, Sean Barrens to Colorado. And one thing Colorado drafts is those good undersized defensemen. No better than Sam Girard. Well, sorry, Sam Girard wasn't drafted by Colorado. He was acquired via trade. He was actually drafted by Nashville, another team that really identifies good young defensemen. But Colorado's drafted obviously Cale Makar, Connor Timmins. The list goes on. They can identify D as well. And I think Sean Barrens, they don't want to, and Bowen Byram's there. It's a tough blue line to work your way into in Colorado because they have a lot of good up-and-coming guys. But I think Sean Barrens is maybe a little bit more physical, but kind of plays a somewhat similar game as far as power play quarterback to a Sam Girard. I don't know if he'll put up huge numbers in the NHL, much like Girard hasn't, but just a very efficient first pass kind of guy. But overall, this list, you got a lot of U.S. players, a lot of guys from the USHL, but also some guys from Spitfire Scouting. And as I said, I don't want to pump Matt Coronato's tires too much now that he's a future Calgary Flame. But all in all, that's a great pick for the Titans at 14. He has a bright future ahead.
Yeah, if you're a Colorado Avalanche prospect, especially on the blue line, just be prepared that you might get traded at some point because there's only 6 spots and they're all so skilled and, you have to be a little bit different. So that will be interesting to watch. Let's quickly, we got about 10 minutes left on the hour and a half airtime that I rented for this program. It's like the ice time, right? You know, you got to leave that 10 minutes for the Zamboni to clean it after for the next group. But anyway, let's get into the rest. Tell me what you like from these four clubs, and then I'll bring up one more after that.
Yeah, Dean, my eye right away goes to the Ice Vikings here. I think they did well with Carson Lambos, Francesco Pinelli, who a lot of people thought was a first-round talent. They stepped up and took him in the first round, even though he slid into the second round, and Los Angeles actually traded up to get him there. And I liked Ben Gaudreau. I thought he was close to a first-round talent. I really liked his goaltending at the World Under-18s. So I think they did well with their three picks. North Stars, I thought, were maybe a bit hit and miss at times, but Fabian Lysell and William Stromgren, the two Swedish forwards, have very high ceilings. Outlaws, again, I think they drafted well. I like Othman, who again had a good U18s. Xavier Bourgault wasn't my personal choice for Edmonton at 22nd overall in the NHL. I'm not as big of a fan, but I think following up on him since the selection, he's got a lot of upside. And I think the Kisakov pick is boom or bust, but the boom factor is real there. Buffalo went for guys like Rosen and Poldapov and Kisakov. They really went boom or bust with their forwards, and I like the player. And then obviously the Blizzard, Zachary Larehu is just, like we said with Svechkov, I think he's a safer pick to make the NHL, and it's just a matter of what that upside's going to be for the Blizzard. But a guy that's going to play a bit of Brad Marchand-style hockey and hit all the categories for the UFHL for the Blizzard.
All right, as we look at a few more teams, the thing that stands out here for me is we made some history with some sales and reaching monetary monetary milestones. We've also made history by having the first former NHL player become an owner, and they make some history by keeping it in the family with the Dynasty pick.
Yeah, this is the one that pops from this page, Dean, is Dynasty selecting Cole Hawkins, who is a cousin of Ryan Malone, the Dynasty owner. So Ryan obviously identified Cole Hawkins as the guy he wanted there. He went 77th overall in the third round in the NHL to Calgary. But big, strong player, big, strong young kid who actually plays the game a lot like Ryan Malone, a bit of a budding power forward, shoots the puck well, plays physical, has got good speed and skating for his size. A guy who I think is going to be a good pro hockey player. So good on Ryan for keeping it in the family and selecting his young cousin Cole Hawkins for the Dynasty. And Olin Zellweger as well for the Mystics is a guy that really shot up thanks to the World Under-18s where, they didn't really know his role there with Canada, and he ended up quarterbacking the top power play unit. And you can see how he's going to have a big role in Anaheim in the future. And the Mystics traded up to get into that range to select Olin Zellweger. That was another one of those bidding wars in the second round where the Mystics traded up and they really wanted that guy. So they got their guy with Olin Zellweger. But overall, yeah, all these franchises made quality picks.
Man, Ryan Malone, all he has, he's like phones up Stamkos, hey, I got a hat for you coming. Now he phones up his cousin. Like, not every owner gets to phone up the players on their team and chat with them. Like, we might have to have a Malone tax or something for him that he has to pay because he has such an advantage. It's pretty impressive stuff, but I absolutely love that pick. All right, let's wrap up with a little praise for some of the scouting agencies that are on here. I just want to say a personal congratulations to High Level Scouting and Trish and Craig and George. George helped us for a number of months as well before he struck out on his own. But the work that I know that they've put into us, we would be number 6 on this list. I think we would be. But congratulations to High Level Scouting, and congratulations to all the scouts, I feel, who made out very well, but none better than Spitfires. I got to tell you, every time we were doing track in the draft, I was always trying to find a player not owned by Spitfire to talk about. It was difficult, man. It was very difficult to do because they had so many great prospects.
Dale Hardy did a wonderful job at last year's futures auction, kind of unheralded because he didn't go after the real big fish, but what he did was just he nailed every bargain buy, and he really focused on the 2021 eligibles because there were 2022 and 2023 top-end prospects, but he zeroed in on the 2021 guys, and he let the big bidding wars go. He didn't jump in on Logan Stankoven. He didn't jump in on Owen Power, those high sellers, but what he did is somehow, Owen Power goes $525, Logan Stankoven goes $520. Somehow he's sitting there and gets Matty Beniers for $50, William Eklund for $50, and you just go down the list here, and that's why his total net profit is that high. But 11 out of 64 prospects selected in the 2021 UFHL entry draft auction were property of Spitfire Scouting. So a big congratulations to Dale Hardy, who led the way in this year's entry auction. And then working your way down the list, like you said, everybody had strong showings, but Can West, obviously, with the Generals keeping it in the house, and those players were getting picked no matter what. They had 8 guys go. Pipeline prospects, Arnie Entz of the Royals, general manager, had 7. Daltech Scouting Services, Gur Daltech, actually had the second most prospects selected at 9, but came in at 4th with the total net profit. Part of that was he took a bit of a hit on the Logan Stankoven, although Duckman's helped him out by keeping Logan Stankoven on day 1 and getting him with the last pick of the first round. But right. That was one of only 16. There was only 6 players out of 64 where the scouts took a loss. The sale price in the net value coming out of the entry auction was less than what they paid to acquire the player a year ago in the futures auction. So only 6 out of 64 trended down or didn't bring back the return on investment. The other 58, I guess it would be, brought a lot of return. And like you said, you look at guys like Beniers and Eklund and stuff, $50 buys that are selling for over $2,000. So you can see how the ability for the scouts to find those bargains and to really identify the top talents a year out or now 3 years out with the futures auction. There's a real legitimate opportunity to monetize your eye for talent scouting for the UFHL and Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports.
Yeah, you are literally scouting real-world players for fantasy teams, and look at that, over $5,000 by being very smart. I think a lot of teams, a lot of scouts rather, might be taking a different approach to the futures auction, which we have coming up. So we got through the draft, a lot of hard work by you and Andrea and Nathan. Thank you very much. Let's get to the futures auction now and the details on that coming up.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the technical difficulties, the glitch that we had on Friday night with the player auction tool on the UFFS platform caused us to postpone round 2 of the entry auction until Sunday, which then bumped the futures auction 2 weeks down the road because we didn't want to do it on the August-long holiday weekend. So the futures auction is now scheduled for Sunday, August 8th, and there'll be 64 prospects, my personal top 64 prospects from the 2024 NHL draft class. So 3 years out, Dean, those prospects ways away draft group, that class, led up by guys like Cole Iserman and Aaron Kitty Harju and Berkeley Catan, and it's a quality draft class. So I think the scouts have 2 extra weeks to prepare and do their research on those 64 prospects, as well as the ones that didn't make my top 64 that'll go to open market. And certainly if you're listening and you want to get involved in scouting for the UFFS platform, no better time to jump in than ahead of the futures auction. Get in, make some investments, and see how that pays off in 3 years' time on these top-end prospects.
All right, pretty good stuff. We have like a minute and 45 seconds left. You want to do any dancing, or are you good to wrap this up? I don't know, man. You didn't get to catch any fish on the expansion draft, but again, great work by everybody this weekend. Great patience on the owners. Congratulations to all the owners. Congratulations to the scouts. Congratulations on the players on being drafted in our league, and hopefully one day they'll all become athlete NFTs as well. Thank you so much, Larry, for being a part of this show. I always love doing these broadcasts because it's so easy. I just tee you up and away you go, and we'll be doing a bit of a special UFHL Now show this weekend. I'm heading back to God's country, Manitoba, but on the way I'm going to stop in Saskatoon, and so it'll be, instead of this, I'm going to try to take the jersey, though, because I want to get a picture of my dad with my jersey, but it'll be an on-the-road edition of UFHL Now that we're going to record, so I will chat with you on Friday for that, as well as lots of times throughout the week when I DM you with all my questions. But thanks so much for being a part of this show, and thanks for everything that you guys did this weekend to make sure we had a draft.
Thanks, Dean. Looking forward to it. And certainly, as we said off the top of the show, we made commentary on all these prospects that were picked, but we're not declaring any winners and losers today. That'll come out in the wash 3 to 5 years from now. So we'll wait and see who the real winners and losers are and the real value picks are for the franchises from the 2021 UFHL entry auction. But just exciting to get that event. The new system with franchises picking their preferred prospect, bidding on the draft spot and picking preferred prospect, I think went over a lot better. I think everybody liked the new system and can't wait to see how these prospects develop. And then, like I said, next up, the futures auction where the scouts get to go back to work.
And we'll have more draft talk with Craig Button and myself on Tracking the Draft this Wednesday right here on UFSN. Thank you so much, Larry, and thank you to everybody for listening. I got the music back, so I'll play us out. We'll talk to you later.